And welcome to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. This week, we are going to be taking a look at a very serious topic, the rising rate of student suicides. Not just students, but even kids who are above, I think, should say around the age of 25. That's when they're still trying to define themselves, come into their own. There is pressure of an identity pressure, pressure of jobs, pressure from peer pressure, pressure from social media, stresses that you and I probably don't even know have existed now. For instance, even the whole question of am I a girl or a boy, that becomes a big identity crisis also. So, today what we are dealing with, one doesn't know what the kids today, the young minds are dealing with and what they are coping and why are they choosing suicide as the only option. We're going to be taking a look at this phenomena. Today, I have with me, joining me on the show is SAUMYA Saxena. She's associate professor at the law school, OP Jindal University. I have MONISHA BHASKAR. She is a former nursery school principal, former banker, and of course, a theatre activist. ANJALI RAGHBEER, she is a student counselor for students going to the US, UK, and Canada. And TALISH, she is an advocate. So I'll begin with you, Soumya. How do you see if you can just place it in some context for us, because I have with me the study from the National Crime Records Bureau, and it is,
Right.
it's worrying. It says as much as 4% increase, while the suicide rate increases 2%, the student suicide rate increases 4% every year. And in the last decade, the numbers have doubled from 6,654 to 13,044. That is the seriousness
Hmm.
of the crisis. We've all also heard about the Orissa case recently, where a young girl committed suicide because she was being blackmailed by a boyfriend. Before that, in Gorakhpur, a young girl committed suicide because her marks were not for the entrance engineering exam were not up to the mark. So, all kinds of pressures, Soumya, really.
No, of course, there are lots of pressures. And in fact, I'm teaching that age group. I'm teaching undergraduates where they're at that age when they're most vulnerable to such pressures as well. But from the case that has actually triggered this debate, which is the one that happened at KIIT, and that made me think of basically two broad reasons or two broad themes to why these suicides might be happening and the kind of pressure that students might be under. The first would be that in this case, what has happened at KIIT, which is the issue of harassment. This was an issue of harassment of toxic masculinity, of harassment because of her being a woman, and the administration taking a very unsympathetic stance and not protecting her adequately. And the other kind of theme under which you find a lot of suicides, occurring is the crisis of mental health. Now, of course, there are significant overlaps between the two, but we have to recognize that there is one case which is, situations like the one that Rohit Vemula was faced with, situations like what this woman underwent, which is caste-based, class-based discrimination. And we have to take account of the fact that we've not been able to address this in our education systems sufficiently. Now, mental health crisis, of course, now universities are under pressure to provide a lot of counseling within university, within the system. But having said that, mental health itself has become the vocabulary of mental health, I think, needs to be talked about a little bit because it's reached a point where there is so much media that you're consuming. There is so much Instagram knowledge around mental health conversations. It can actually go either way. The idea is to destigmatize the idea of going to therapists or talking about mental health and seeking help. But what it's also become is basically a lot of young people characterizing all hardship as triggers, characterizing almost any difficulty as trauma. And that vocabulary also needs to be talked about a little bit because when there is a clinical diagnosis of depression and anxiety, that needs to be addressed slightly differently with a bit more support rather than it becoming a part of pop culture vocabulary. So that is the mental health issue that I think one needs to be talking about. But also we can't kind of overlook the fact that in this particular case it was literally this boy harassing this woman for days on end, months on end. And when she approaches the administration, there's almost a very conservative pressure that administration feels under to say that, oh, women shouldn't be doing certain things and that's why we can't intervene in this. And that generation gap itself creates a significant mental health crisis for young people because our states are very quick to intervene and say, even in the Uttarakhand law code, we now have a provision that says that you're brazenly living together. That's what the high court judge in Uttarakhand actually said. So consensual relationships are looked at as brazen kind of conduct by young people, but actually non-consensual sexual harassment is looked
Mm.
at as something that universities don't want to acknowledge. So I'll stop there as just a starting
Okay.
point.
Well, thanks. That was a good curtain raiser. So, Talish, I'll come to you also. Soumya has given us a good curtain raiser on the case, the Orissa case, of course, but even otherwise, is this, what do we call this, adolescents who feel the pressure and they have nowhere to go? At least when you're older, mental health, you don't have an issue going to a counselor. When you're younger, you also, you have a problem in recognizing and admitting that is part of the problem.
Right. So, Priya, a couple of things that I just want you to, go backwards here. We are living in a century which is pretty much playing out like the last century. And I think what does become very imperative is that when we look at young people, we don't see the kind of world that they are seeing from their perspective. They are very well informed. They are also constantly within a news cycle, whether through their social media or their access to the internet, and that awareness, they do not know how to piecemeal and digest it. That's number one. The second is that they do not have a language of either protest or expression, which I think is something that all of us acknowledge, that children may not be able to say it. And one of the things that I found was very often with my children as well, that during COVID, I found all adults script. And the children didn't, until a very wise person pointed out, saying that the children didn't have a vocabulary to, crib or protest about. So there is that stress that is anyway there, and then it doesn't help that we are in a country where the population is so huge that even if you're one in a million, you are still not exactly within the 0.001%, and the opportunities that are there. So in case there is a person who is going through the schooling system, which is brutal currently, I mean, their pressures are brutal. When you look at the comparatives that are there, it is brutal. And you have a news cycle which tells them constantly. So you're on a social media, you see a child prodigy. We didn't even know about it. They do. And they do compare, I mean, as to the ages that are there, as to what they're looking at. So that's one aspect of it, as to the kind of world that they are in. The second part, which is actually very important, is that between the technology, between the world that has changed, there is a generation gap that's huge. And therefore, I think it's a need of the hour for the older generations to realize that those that have come in beyond Gen X and the millennials are also facing tremendously changed worlds, and a world that is actually a very threatened world. And when they are looking at it, how do they, how do they internalize this entire thing? But the third part, which I do feel, is also that the stigma around reporting and talking about this is no longer there. Therefore, they're getting reported more. It's not like it wasn't happening. But please remember that 20 years back, something like a suicide figure or a report coming out on suicide would not have made it to a round table. Today, we are talking about these conversations. And I think it's been there in the papers for very long about how India is sitting at the brink of a mental health crisis. Except that, and it possibly may have been there previously as well, except that we didn't call it that. So once the spotlight is shed, which is often there, that the moment a spotlight comes up on an issue like this, very often people are likely to say, oh, but this is happening with this generation. No, it was happening before as well. It is just that now it is no longer camouflaged, and it is called out for what it is. So all of us as women have undergone some manner of harassment, like the student at KIT did, except that her suicide, nobody is trying to now window dress it as anything more than a harassment-based violence against women. So our vocabularies have become far better at being able to narrow it down and put it there. And in a way, therefore, I feel that then change is round the corner, because the moment one starts addressing these issues is the moment that we are one step forward towards finding the solution in that sense.
Okay, Monisha, you've been working with a younger lot of kids also. This pressure is something, when we were kids, we fortunately had no social media. How much of a role does that play? Peer pressure, how much of a role does that play?
A very, very big role, Priya. What I have seen is that parents, because either they are working or because of lack of how to look after their little one, the first thing that they hand over to them are iPhones or their laptop or something with little things like, ma'am, खाना खाने के लिए हम वो लगा देते हैं, iPad दे देते हैं. They come with a lot of pride to say that, listen, our child is very, very good with the iPad. he can do this and she can do that. And I'm like, do you read a book to him or her? Do you talk to them? Do you interact with them? No, ma'am, I'm busy. Husband is busy. Mother-in-law is not well. So as a result, it is a virtual world for that child from a very young age. The problem with virtual world is it's a one-way communication. Television was called the idiot box at one time, but now they are these little things because all it does is it talks to you, it gives you social media, whatever interaction. There are influencers, there is a lot of information on social media. A lot of it is fake, a lot of it is make believe, a lot of it is aspirational. Whereas, it opens up a world for them which they are not able to handle. However, the worst part of that is that they become extremely lonely as they grow up because your virtual world takes over all human interaction. When
Yeah.
we were younger, something, you had a cousin to talk to, you had friends you played with, you had an elder you could, if you felt anything, I wouldn't call it depression or, very strong words, but there were low times there, or, your confidence took a beating. You had a cousin or a good friend or a chacha or a masi, somebody that you spoke with, and they pulled you out of that. Now, because of only social media, their go-to is social media. Their friends as they grow older, their Facebook accounts shows thousands of friends, but they don't have a single one that they can talk heart to when they are going through any kind of, a tough phase. Be it education, be it the way they look, there is pressure for that. The kind of holidays they want, so there is this constant pressure building up from a very, very young age. And I think this leads to situations like this because they are not able to handle reality. And that's really another
And-
thing I see with parents is, and another thing I see with the generation is that their access to alcohol and drugs starts very
Yeah.
early. It is not, there was a time when at our ages also we did it when we were in our teens or 18, but you tried a sip here and a sip there. It was not your go-to thing to dull your
Correct.
brains or to, आजकल तो हर जगह मतलब you can find it from a panwala to your best friend to a customs officer, name it and you can get it. I always wonder, A, where they get it from, I mean, how they get it, and secondly, how do they have the wherewithal to get it? It must be expensive. So, अगर आपको एग्जाम देना है, if you can't cope with maths, drink पी लो, एक पिंक रंग की tablet खा लो, dull your senses, So this also is leading to a certain kind of loneliness, which I think aids in suicide because they don't know what to do. They don't know
Yeah.
whom to talk to. And for
That's
suicides,
so.
they say it's that one crazy second. If somebody is able to pull you out of that, if you're standing on the edge of your
Yeah.
terrace, it's that
Right.
one passing moment between you jumping and somebody saying, hey, listen, dinner's on the table. And the moment passes. That, unfortunately, with social media is not happening.
Very well put. In fact, the girl from Gorakhpur, young girl, she had even given a mobile to be recharged to her dad. She spoke to her dad. He said, "Don't worry." She said, "Don't publicize my marks that I failed." He said, "Don't worry, you try again." And that was the last conversation. He thought all is well. She went to her room and she hung herself. So, Anjali, you are dealing with that pressure cooker, student admissions, people who have career
Yes.
choices, and lack of jobs. So,
So, I mean, it is an increasing amount of pressure from everyone, whether it's parents. I mean, I see parents when they come in, they are so ambitious for their children. And I think
that's
part of the issue is there as well. You're a mediocre student, you want them to get into the top university. How is that possible? So the pressure just mounts, the sort of, I always say people come with a college list to me, and I say you should not come with a college list because if you don't get into that, you're going to find yourself very disappointed. So the child, you're already setting themselves, them for disappointment.
Hmm.
So I see it all the time. The parents are so ambitious for children. Besides the peers who are also very ambitious, and children always pushing themselves above and beyond. And like someone mentioned, the school curriculum itself is so demanding. On top of that, you pile up wanting to go abroad or wanting to go to a top institution. That brings pressure on its own as well. So yeah, somewhere I think it is also you have to manage ambitions and have a dialogue with your child. Many times, they will come and confide in me because I'm the third party, a neutral party. They can talk about things which they can't with their own parents. Um, so I feel, the communication has to be really improved
but
all,
it
all the
has
way.
Has it worsened over the years, and also the lack of jobs? Is that a big issue? Because Indian universities, a lot of people feel that यहाँ से हमें jobs नहीं मिलेंगे. I'm going to
Of
take a break, and
course.
Anjali, I'll come with you. You answer this question after a quick break.
Sure.
Hello and welcome back to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. We are taking a look at an issue that is really plaguing our society, not just India, but I think it's a global phenomenon, the rise of student suicide. Rise of suicide from kids, I think from their teens to about age 24, 25. And Anjali, since you do student admissions and you know the pressure that is there, has that increased more? Are people having less faith in Indian colleges? Everybody wants to go abroad, and you know that also doesn't guarantee a job. Is that the biggest issue?
Of course, it is a huge, huge pressure, definitely. And it's becoming worse over the last 10 years when I've mentored students. It's definitely worse. And I wouldn't say it's restricted only to India. Today, even going to the US or UK for your studies, you're spending a huge packet. And at the end of it, you're not guaranteed a job. Even if you get a job, you're not guaranteed a visa. And all of that is sort of playing into the narrative of depression, suicide, of feeling low self-esteem, not knowing what to do with your future, a sort of hopelessness in that segment. So, like I said, communication, counseling, I think that is the need of the hour. And that the stigma, if we can remove around that, if we can bring more avenues to, help students to reach out to people who are experts, I think that would really help everyone. And I think even parents need to get into this narrative, not only the youth. The parents is where it stems from. You need to be vigilant. You need to have the time to see your child. You need to build that communication. That is what I would say.
And look out for the warning signs. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
I would second what Anjali says, because I have in the nursery school, I have parents coming for their child's admission. I'm sitting on my desk, the parents are seated across, and I can see a little mop of hair. That's the size of the child, he's standing between them. And their questions, ma'am, can you tell us after school, will he get into IIT? And I'm trying to see the eyes of the child and say, ye ladka hai ki ladki hai, aap do to dikhaiye. The next question is, ma'am, now it's a play school. The next question is, ma'am, we walked around, but we didn't see any place for horse riding. This is the size of the legs of the child. How will he sit on a horse or she sit on a horse? I said, no, we have normal, you have slides and you have your swings and you have your little splash pool. Okay, ma'am, and tell us, do you look into cricket coaching? Because IPL is very big. And I like aapki aspiration, and then I always counter question them and say, aap IPL mein khele the? Nahi, aapki wife kheli thi? Nahi. आप IIT से हो? नहीं. वाइफ IIT से है? नहीं. आप घोड़ा चलाते हो? वो घोड़ा चलाती है? नहीं. तो दोनों की खुद की aspirations, वो छोटे से, that little fellow who's just this little mop of hair is what I can see, and then I call him around and say, idhar aao, come and talk to me. They have already started. He's just about 2.25 साल का होगा, and this is where the parents have already started. IIT में घुसना है, घोड़ा चलाना है, IPL में जाना. So look at the pressure. You're not letting that child breathe. They even asked me for piano classes. These are the hands. How will his finger, आप कुछ तो सोचिए. But this is the pressure that also starts at home. I think that is also a lot of them.
I want to add to that. Yeah.
That pressure.
Yeah. I want to add to that. There are even dummy schools where students who are applying for IIT, they drop out of school. They are admitted to a dummy school, which gives them certificates, etc. Just because 2 years the child devotes to IIT prep. Can you imagine socially and mentally what that is doing? And what if that child doesn't get into
Doesn't
IIT?
crack it, yes.
That's true.
It really breaks my heart to see these kids who are being pushed like that.
So actually, yeah, I'd like to come in, because very often I think it's we also look at technical education in that sense of creating a pressure. I'm now beginning to see the same thing amongst young lawyers that have come in. This basic unreality of expectation, and I think I want to bring that focus back on young people, because somebody at 24 has gone and traveled the world. Now, that in India is a little bit of a difficulty given the fact that we are all supported by our parents, and there are certain lifestyles that choices that we can't make as a developing economy, right? And
Yeah.
there is an immense amount of pressure that is put in by social media. And in fact, across the world, you will see that now there is getting to be a move as to at what age the child can get across at social media, because it's not just peer pressure. It is far more than peer pressure. It is a peer pressure along with a dopamine hit. So there is an addiction that is also coming in. So
Correct.
I mean, and therefore the need for that kind of legislation to be brought about as to what age can they be exposed to this, because with deep fakes and other things coming in, it is extremely difficult for children of a particular age, young adults, to be able to differentiate amongst other things. And the number of cases that we are now seeing of impersonated personalities, impersonated photographs, these are all criminal offenses that are there. And you feel so sorry, because in all of these, our legislation is not equipped to deal with rehabilitation of children that err on the wrong side of law. Of course, there are remand homes and other things. But you see, where does the mechanism come in where a child is taught the ability to be able to think through and course correct? Because once you're
Right.
on the wrong side of law, where are that? The second part about
Okay.
suicide,
Yeah.
which I must bring forth.
Ah.
We know that there is an increase in suicide rates. We know that those attempts are moving forward. How many institutes have put in together a first responder mechanism for suicide? And I find that strangely lacking, given that some institutes do have that, the others don't. So, what do you do if somebody is trying to commit suicide? What if they're half dead? What if they're already dead? What do the people
Right.
around them do? And that is something that we don't have a mechanism, an institutional
But
mechanism.
this happens so instantly. I don't, the people, Soumya, the thing is that they don't give you
Yeah.
warning signs. The kids are happily chatting, about mobile phones, and tomorrow we'll do this with you, and you'll come and pick me up, and they go to the room and they hang themselves. So
No, exactly what
that's
I was actually going to say. So, I mean, I echo the thoughts of the other panelists as well, but in some senses, universities have started providing mechanisms to, let's say, deal with these stresses. So, they'll have committees, they'll have student groups, they'll have helplines. But the point is, now students know who to approach, they don't know how to approach. And
right.
that's happened because we've become an increasingly more individualized society, a more individualistic society, where actually your mirror is your cell phone. It's not your peers. It's not your parents.
Yeah, that's
Parental
right.
involvement or involvement of your peers, which would otherwise be much more honest, is no longer happening because you're actually modeled yourself as completely different person on social media. And that person then also has to take the fall for your mistakes. Those mistakes are permanent. They kind of have they're encashed in your, like internet history. So in one sense, social media has contributed significantly to us being our ability to backtrack and course correct. So we have all of these mechanisms, but we no longer are able to, despite having the vocabulary, actually communicate our struggles.
But Monisha, one thing, are children very cruel? There's a lot of peer pressure and ragging. You had today's papers talk about the rise in ragging also.
Yes.
Why do children do this to themselves? And at a younger level, this is not dragging us till they're a little older. Here, it's at a younger level also we see this happening.
One point, Priya, is that they are brutally honest. They have no filters. So things that you talk about as body shaming, or as, in the
Yeah.
sense that they would be calling each other and saying, tum mote ho, tum kale ho, tum ugly ho, tum, whatever. They are very and they're not that just with each other. They're even that with staff or with people. That's the way they are. So it starts at a very young age when you have to sensitize them to say कि बेटा किसी को उसको बुरा लगा है, go say sorry. जब भी you have to teach those things to these little children. Unfortunately, parents don't have the time to do that at home. In nursery schools and little schools, they are, the time is very limited. So while we keep saying that, there is nobody to reiterate the same value system at home.
Right.
These children with a television in front of them are free to do what they want. They are little bullies because parents turn into yes men and yes women. For the thing कि अब tantrum कौन handle करेगा, वो खाना नहीं खाएगा, अच्छा चलो हाँ बोल दो उसको iPad पकड़ा दो, खाना तो खा लेगा, तो सो तो जाएगा, या नहा तो लेगी.
Correct.
Becoming a crutch instead of spending time and reasoning with the child. Where do you get your value system? You get it at home. How do you talk to your
Right.
staff? How do you talk to a pet? How do you deal with all this? Comes from your house. So if there is
Right.
nobody there but a maid who is either has her own language issue, or she's on her own phone. So your child is on the iPad, the maid is on her own phone taking selfies around a beautiful house to show her people ke main yahan kaam. So the entire system is so warped that because of
Right.
lack of human intervention, these children don't know any better. So if you have a bully temper,
That's
you become a bully adult. If you have a
even
submissive, lack of confidence kind of a quiet personality, it just
hmm.
goes 10 years by the time you're a teenager because nobody's corrected you to give you that confidence to say, nahi beta, dark is nice. Nahi beta, it's okay, you can wear
Yeah,
it. So all
that's
this
true.
is lacking. Social media and
And
social
also,
media
are we,
doesn't help.
boss? I don't know. This is we're out of time, but there is also, the upbringing. Is this back to the joint family system where a grandmother or grandfather was around the house? Second, we're giving kids too many rights. There's parents are scared of scolding a child. He's
Yes,
sensitive. Children
they're
need their
scared.
space.
They are
There's a
Totally.
scared
whole
of
lot of
going on holidays, Priya. They come
right.
back after 2 months of grueling summer, and you ask them, okay, now let's talk. You went to Nani house, Dadi house. Where did you go? You're like a show and tell. They will turn around. Parents will tell, ma'am, we didn't go anywhere for 6 weeks. Why? Because she didn't want to go. She's 3.5. When did she become the decision maker?
That's
I
that
think
is
we're
Let
all
the
about gentle
psychosis
parenting
cry.
young kids, but we're
I know.
also about suddenly imposing a lot of morality standards when they're older. So
yeah.
initially we're listening to them a lot, but when they start making their own choices and their intercaste love and their interreligious, alliances, then suddenly it hits you that, we can't give them so much freedom. And I think
Okay.
that's also something that is fueling this generation gap. And I'm hoping that millennials who are parenting now would not do that when their kids grow up. But I think
Okay.
college orientation is necessarily about penalizing consensual love, which is also then fueling the lack of vocabulary around harassment. So we can no longer call something harassment because we think it's immoral for it to have happened, whereas with
Okay.
little kids we are just dealing with them with little kid gloves and letting them have their way in
Also,
almost everything.
lastly, one little
So,
point.
so no,
सब
we totally
चलता
out of
है
time, huh?
online. These days sab chalta hai. You don't see this is also normal, that is also normal,
Right.
chhedi also normal, drugs bhi normal hai, stress.
Uh, so we
What
need
is
to bring back some of the old parameters.
where's the red flag? At which point do you see a red flag as a parent or society or teachers or counselors or anyone as an adult, as a sibling? What's
That's
the
true.
red flag today?
Okay, I'm
Nothing.
going to call you. We're out of time. I would have carried on this conversation, but thank you all for coming and sharing. I think flagging issues that are of concern, they happen in our everyday lives and we just bypass it. So I think it's good that we managed to flag some of the issues over here. But thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.